and welcome to This Week in Regional Mixed Martial Arts, something that I've been kind of wanting to do for a while, but I haven't had, obviously, the MMA specific channel until now, so this is likely going to become a weekly thing here on Greedo Plays MMA. Obviously, we still do the UFC and PFL predictions, but on top of that now, I'm going to go through the best regional fights every single week in the world of mixed martial arts, and there's really going to be two types of fighters we're going to be looking at when we do these type of videos. One, fighters we think that are going to potentially be in the UFC, PFL, or in the Contender Series, or I guess the PFL Challenger Series if they still do that, but fighters that we think are going to make their mark in a major promotion shortly, so we're trying to obviously see these guys before they get to the big show. And two, former PFL/UFC fighters who are trying to work their way back into either the PFL or the UFC. There's a lot of former Bellator fighters that are without a contract right now. Hell, look at Patchy Mix. I know he's going to sign with the UFC, but right, there's a lot of former Bellator guys who are just in the regional scene, and we might see those guys down the line here with these type of videos. So if you want to see more This Week in Regional MMA, folks, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more. Going forward, I'm going to try to get these videos out a little bit earlier. Today I have this going out on a Thursday for this week. I'm going to try to do either Wednesday or probably Wednesday in the weeks coming up. So make sure to go check out our UFC Fight Night Burns versus Morales predictions. That is linked in the description down below, so go check that out. And on Greedo Plays, the main channel, daily MLB and NBA best bets. Okay, so we're going to be going over 9 fights today, 10 fighters in specific we're going to be detailing. There's one fight where, if you've seen it, it's ridiculous that it's happening. That's at the end of the video. My goodness, we've got a very old UFC vet fighting today. But the first of our 10 or 9 fights today comes in Aries FC. This is the main event of Aries on Friday, so tomorrow. And Baky Chamsudinov is fighting on this card against Thiago Lima. If you don't know who Baky Chamsudinov is, this is a former PFL fighter who owns the one win in mixed martial arts against Cedric Doumbé. Now, regardless of how you scored that fight, the final winner of that fight is Baky Chamsudinov. The fight gets ended due to Doumbé having a splinter in his foot. Mark Goddard says, "Fight over, fight." I can't do a British accent. It says fight over a million times, and Doumbé just wanted to pull, obviously, the splinter off of his foot. Chamsudinov wanted him to continue the fight and just take the splinter out, but Mark Goddard wasn't having it. So Baky Chamsudinov wins the fight. He beats Doumbé, and now he's got kind of a star around him, right? He was supposed to fight in Bellator in November, but the PFL canceled that card. He's supposed to take on Oliveira Enkamp, and now here he is in Aries. Is Baky Chamsudinov signed anywhere? Because if not, why doesn't the UFC have this guy? Why doesn't the Professional Fighters League have this guy? It doesn't make sense to me. He actually has kind of a tough matchup this week. He's taking on Thiago Lima, a guy who's gotten on a little bit of a run, has not fought anybody by far at the level of Baky Chamsudinov yet. This is a guy with a 10-1 record. Only loss comes back in 2022. This is a guy who is a pretty decent striker fighting out of Brazil. He is 33 years of age. But undoubtedly, right, we do expect Baky Chamsudinov to win this fight. 23 years of age, he's an MMA factory guy in Paris, France, which again makes it so much more confusing why a major promotion hasn't picked this guy up yet. I mean, I would assume the UFC is going to be calling. If PFL doesn't still have the rights to him and they're just letting him fight elsewhere, I assume the UFC is going to make this move, because I remember there were rumblings about the UFC potentially signing Baky after the Doumbé fight, right? There was a report that they were interested in getting him on the Paris card last year, but I think he was still on the Bellator contract or PFL contract. Now he's fighting in Aries, and Aries is a promotion still on UFC Fight Pass. So I would think he's coming to the UFC very soon. I think at the very least, he'll be on that Paris card that they do every year in September. So in this fight, yeah, we expect Baky Chamsudinov to win this one. This is a very good striker who can mix it up on the ground a little bit too, but Chamsudinov is very solid, and he should be able to get a finish in this fight over Thiago Lima. But excited for that one in Aries FC tomorrow. And we're not done in Aries. We have a second fight over here, not with the name value, but another former Cedric Doumbé opponent. Jordan Zebo takes on Wismay Akhmouch in this fight. Probably the least name value fight that we have this week. Well, we have a couple regional guys who are making their way up. You'll see that in just a few moments here in the next card or the next event we go to. But sticking here in Aries FC, the co-main event of the Chamsudinov Lima card is Jordan Zebo versus Wismay Akhmouch. Jordan Zebo, you likely know him from the Cedric Doumbé fight. He main evented PFL Europe 3 back in 2023, and Cedric Doumbé knocked him out in 9 seconds. That was the whole fight where Cedric Doumbé, and this was incredible to watch. I mean, it was one of the best PFL environments I've ever seen. seen. I think it was Mbappe was in the front row of that card in France, and Doumbé does his whole chant. I think he did it in French, if I'm not mistaken, but it translated to "Jordan, you're dead," and it was one hell of a scene. And Doumbé backs it up by knocking him out in 9 seconds. But Jordan Zebo since then has won 3 consecutive fights here in Aries, beating Carlos Graça by unanimous decision, beating a guy who I'm not going to say his name because it's 20 letters long, his last name. Anyways, he beats him by split decision, and then beat Vincent de la Guerra in his last fight, a 31-21-1 fighter by unanimous decision. Now he gets Wisme Akhmouch, another decent test, a Moroccan-born fighter now training out of France, who's 7-1, 3-1 in Aries, with his only loss being to a 7-0 fighter back in 2022. Back-to-back victories for him. Hasn't really fought the level of competition of Jordan Zebo. But this should make for a pretty good fight, as Akhmouch will likely try to take this fight down, while Zebo will look to keep the fight standing and look to outstrike Akhmouch. I think Zebo will win. I think something that didn't really get talked about when he did fight Doumbé is that he was 22 when that fight happened, right? And I think, the PFL tried, I guess, to do the same exact thing with Baky. They tried to put a young fighter in there with Doumbé, and obviously Baky held his own and won the fight against Doumbé, but obviously Zebo just wasn't ready for that spot yet. I could see, though, Zebo winning this fight. The PFL does a lot of cards in France. Another next fight card, which was supposed to be next week, got canceled. I think that was kind of out of their control. I guess they couldn't get a replacement for Barnouai, who's dealing with a bunch of legal issues right now, but it sucks. The PFL had to postpone that, and I don't know when they're going to be back for PFL Europe. But I could easily see them bringing back Zebo for a France card. I could even see the UFC giving him a shot in the Contender Series. Again, we look at the guys in the Contender, 8-1 guys, which Zebo will be after a victory here, fighting in Aries. I mean, that's the type of guy the UFC is going to want to get. They do look to expand into that France market. He is another MMA factory guy, just like Baky Chamsudinov, and I could see it. He is I'm looking for the word here. He's undersized, thank you, I said thank you to myself. He's undersized for 170 pounds. He just is, He's 5'9", 170. It's a little undersized, I'm not going to lie. But, I mean, he should be able to win this fight against Akhmouch, I think. As long as he's able to keep the fight on the feet, I think he should win. And again, that's just a guy in Jordan Zebo who I'd look at potentially making a shot or getting a shot in the Contender Series just because he's 24 years of age. Again, he's still got his prime ahead of him. I could see Zebo eventually making a run. Again, his only loss is a 9-second knockout to Cedric Doumbé, who should be in the UFC too, but it is what it is. Let's go to Lux. So Lux Fight League promotion over in Mexico. We've got 2 fights on this card we need to talk about. Of course, another area where the UFC is always trying to expand their market. PFL really has not gone to Mexico yet, as we've seen with their incorporation of PFL Pacific, which is going to be happening later this year. They just brought in PFL Africa, which I can't believe saying this. I think it's a really good strategy from PFL. I think this is probably the best thing they've done in a while. I know they're setting up for 1 million fight leagues, but if you are trying to become like what the UFC is, then you have to do that, right? And I don't think the PFL is ever going to get to the level of the UFC, but you have to build up regional stars in Europe, in the oceanic area, in Africa. The problem that the PFL has, though, is that they can't retain this talent once they actually do become stars. Because, I mean, they just got rid of Patchy Mix, who I understand is a Bellator guy, but it's a matter of time before Dakota Ditcheva leaves, right? I could see if Simeon Powell starts winning, I could definitely see the UFC try to get him, and those are their 2 really homegrown stars from PFL Europe, right? But I do like what they're doing, and I think, again, with the incorporation of the oceanic region and Africa, that's really interesting, and starting those fight cards off, or those leagues off with Champion Series cards. So, of course, like in Africa, they're doing a Johnny Epplin main event, and Dakota Ditcheva's on the card as well, but at the same time, you get eyes on PFL Africa as well. I don't know why Ngannou's not main eventing that card. I guess he's just not fighting right now. Anyways, we look at our first fight in Lux today. It's the main event. I believe this card's on Saturday, and this is a pretty good one. Raul Zaragoza takes on Hugo Flores. The guy to watch out for here is Raul Zaragoza, excuse me. I don't know how many fights he's away from the UFC. Because I've seen guys with a way smaller resume get a shot in the Contender Series before, right? This is a guy you should probably look out for, right? 5-0 right now, knockout win in his last fight, capturing the Lux Fight League Championship, taking on a guy here now in Hugo Flores, who is the lightweight champion. Zaragoza is going down. He's the welterweight champion, going down to 155 to try to get 2 championships, which is interesting here. So this is a guy, again, who can fight 170 pounds, fight at 155 pounds. He's going down for this one. He is a welterweight who has not fought at lightweight in his professional career just yet, but he's going to try to go down and win that belt. Back-to-back victories over a 7-3 and 6-0 fighter. This is a guy who's got a very good stand-up game, and I can easily see the UFC trying to bring in. He is 6 feet tall at 170 pounds, trying to go down to 155. Right? I mean, this is a guy who I'm not going to compare him to like a Daniel Zellhuber, but this is the type of guy that I guess the same build he is of Zellhuber. But this is a guy that they could easily put on the card in Guadalajara later this year on Mexican Independence Day. They're trying to get more Mexican talent. This is the type of guy that they're going to look for. Again, I doubt he gets immediately signed to the UFC, but this is likely a contender series guy this year. If he can win this fight, honestly, I could see him at 6-0 at 26 years of age. If he can get a finish here, I would expect him on the contender series, really. But there's a fighter on this card who I think actually has a better chance of getting on the contender series, and it's not Raul, who I think will find a way to the knockout. Hugo Flores, again, is the lightweight champion over there, but he's 13-5. He's been knocked out multiple times before. Sergio Casio beat him in 2020. Ignacio Bahamondes has beaten him in the past. It's a fight that Raul should likely win. The fighter on this card who I think honestly has the biggest potential to get into the UFC is actually Andrea Vasquez, who's fighting in the co-main event here for the strawweight championship. She is the reigning strawweight champ over there in Lux, and with the UFC strawweight division always being, let's just be honest, kind of mid, I could see them trying to get a fighter like Vasquez, who is 7-2. Her last loss does come back in 2023 against Soraya Orozco, a fighter who is now in the Professional Fighters League and fighting Alara Joanne later this year. I'm not telling you Vasquez is going to be a world champion. I'm not telling you she's going to be really great in the UFC. But guys, when you look at the type of fighters they have at 115 pounds, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in Vasquez. And I think she's probably better than like a Sam Hughes. I think Sam Hughes sucks at fighting, but somehow her conditioning wins her a million fights. I don't understand. Anyways, though, right? I mean, there's a lot of low-level UFC fighters at 115 pounds. I'm not telling you Vasquez is going to be that either, but I think it's worth a look, right? And especially, again, we look at these markets that the UFC are trying to tap into. Mexican MMA market's supposed to be huge for them, right? So why not bring in a fighter in Andrea Vasquez, who's in her prime right now, 31 years of age, about to be 8-2 with a victory here. But honestly, a very tough fight for her, right? Taking on Dana Garcia, who is 7-1 in Mexico as well. And this might be a fighter who, if she wins, then she's going to get the look for the contender series. She's 24 years of age, right? 7-1 professionally. Her only loss comes back in 2021 in Icon, but since then, she's on a 5-fight winning streak. She hasn't fought in anybody that great yet, but if she beats Vasquez, then we have to start considering her as a legit prospect. Because again, 24 years of age, if she wins the Lux Championship, I wouldn't expect her to be on the contender series this year, but if she can start racking up a couple more victories, by next year, she'll be 25 years of age, defended the Lux Championship a couple times. All right, that's a legitimate prospect the UFC can look to. Now, I don't know if she can win this fight personally, though, right? She hasn't fought anybody all that good. Her last fight is over Daniela Melendez back in 2024, and it was a win by unanimous decision. She hasn't beaten anybody really who's been all that great. She hasn't beaten an experienced fighter just yet, and Vasquez will likely win, right? But if Garcia is going to win, she's going to get the fight on the ground, and she's going to try to out-grapple Vasquez. Vasquez, again, is not a bad striker in her own right and can grapple as well. So I wouldn't expect Garcia to win, but the winner of this fight, I think, will be on a short list of fighters at 115 pounds who are going to be looking to get their UFC contract on the contender series. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, again, if the winner is on the contender this year, especially if it's Vasquez. If it's Garcia, definitely expect her to get a shot on Dana White Tuesday nights next season. Or next year. So I think Vasquez will likely win, but I think this is a fight to look out for. Again, the co-main event of Lux, two really good fighters, again, to look out for, really three if you count Garcia, but Raul Zaragoza in the main event, and then the co-main event here for the strawweight championship between Vasquez and Garcia. Let's move on now to one fight over in Brave, and this is just a notable one. Again, you get a former UFC fighter in Victor Hugo, who I think is a couple wins away from the UFC, just because I'm surprised he got cut so quickly. He went 1-1 in the UFC, a victory over Pedro Falcao by unanimous decision, and then a loss to Farid Basharat at UFC 308 to Poirier versus Holloway. He lost it by unanimous decision, and now he's already out of the UFC. Now, Damien Leplus, the brother of Taylor Leplus from Paris, France, I think he's from Paris, I know he's from France, is 18-17-2. Some sites have him at 18-18-1. I don't know what the record really is. But Leplus isn't in a position where he's ever going to be on a major show. Let's just be honest. He's maybe the PFL because they sign anybody. But This is a fight Victor Hugo is going to easily win, right? Leplus gets knocked out a lot. You look at his record, he's been knocked out 8 times. Guys, if you're fighting in regional MMA and you've been knocked out more than 6 times, more than 5 times, I think it's time to hang it up. Leplus is 35 years old. I get it. Go get your bag. I don't know how much Brave is paying him for this fight, and I get it. You're still chasing the dream. But at some point, man, it's just like, I don't know what to say about this. I'm just going to be honest. Right? I'm not trying to hate. I'm just saying, what are we doing entirely here? Victor Hugo is going to knock him out in the first round. I don't care if Victor Hugo wasn't the best in the UFC. He's still a 1-1 guy in the promotion. This guy looked really good in the Contender Series. He actually had a knee bar finish over Eduardo Torres. And that's why it was surprising to me the UFC has such a short leash on him. They usually give contenders guys at least 4 fights. Maybe usually 3, but sometimes 4. I don't get it. Before the UFC, Victor Hugo's last loss is 2014. That was an injury. And yeah, he's fought some cans. I understand that. But Damian Leplus is kind of a can as well. So I just don't understand the matchmaking personally here. Well, I just don't understand why Hugo's out of the UFC. I understand the matchmaking, actually. You get Leplus, who has a name, obviously because of his last name. He's fought former UFC guys in the past. Fairzium stands out, right? He lost to him by knockout in 2016. Again, he's been getting knocked out for a while. He fought Charles Air Jordan in TKO in 2019, got knocked out there. You know, when he fights these type of talent, he usually gets knocked out. He's coming off a victory in Octagon last year, won by TKO due to a body kick in the first round. That's great. Victor Hugo is a guy just exiting the UFC who likely should probably still be getting another shot in the promotion. And now he's taking on a veteran who's been knocked out time in and time out. And Victor Hugo will likely knock out Damian Leplus in the first round. I don't know how far he is from the UFC, but I could see, honestly, right, PFL, they usually get some of these guys, like, hell, look at Callan Lawran, who they just signed. They get a lot of guys who, you know, have kind of been all right in the UFC, have won a couple fights in the UFC, and they take them, like, Kai Kamaka was a guy that I know was a Bellator signing, but still, right, those are the type of guys the PFL will sign, and I wouldn't be surprised if Victor Hugo is on his way to the PFL shortly. I think he's going to beat Damian Leplus, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him again in the Professional Fighters League within the next year. Next up, let's go to American Fight Promotions. Another former UFC name where I don't, and also, like, okay, the thing with Dylan Budka is, I don't know where he goes, okay? I don't know where Dylan Budka is going to go after this. He had 3 fights in the UFC, he went 0-3. Right, lost to Cesar Almeida, got knocked out, then fought Andre Petroski. Budka missed weight, lost by decision, and I remember predicting that fight, and it was literally the easiest one to ever predict. Petroski's just a 10 times better, like, Petroski and Budka are the same fighter, and Petroski's just 10 times better. And then Budka, that for some reason, they had him fight Edin Shabazian. The UFC's done that a little bit with Shabazian. They need him to get wins, so they just give him fighters like Dylan Budka. Same thing happened when he fought, AJ Dobson and Dalcha Lugiambula, right? I mean, those are fighters that Shabazian's much better than, but he's nowhere close to being a top 20 fighter. That's just the thing around Shabazian, let's just be honest. But the Mindless Hulk, Dylan Budka, is back. He's fighting on American Fight Promotions. Not even the fight to watch on this card, I'm going to be honest. The next fight is actually a big-time fight that we're going to talk about for 2 future Contender Series guys, I think, or the winner of that fight will be a future Contender Series guy. But we're on the card already. This is the main event. Dylan Budka versus Robert Gidron. Robert is 8-10. He's fought in LFA before, fought in Bellator against Kyle Crutchmer back in 2019, lost. Again, it's just like, what are we doing? I'd expect Dylan Budka to dominate and probably win this fight by submission. Robert has been subbed in 4 of his 10 fights, 4 of his 10 losses, excuse me. And Budka holds a significant advantage on the ground. We know what Budka brings. He's a former collegiate wrestler, only 25 years of age. So not all hope is lost for Budka. The thing with him, though, is just his record doesn't look very good at 7-5. And he lost LFA to Asmat Bekoyev, who's not horrible at all either, UFC guy. It's just he needs to really stack up some victories. He needs to stack up some victories in the next 3 years, and then we can say, okay, if Dylan Budka is, this is going to be a random shout. If he has like a Lucia Putselova type run outside the UFC, right, then I could see Budka getting a shot. But it took Putselova like 5 years. Now, Budka in 5 years would still be 30, right? And then, okay, and this honestly, Budka losing 3 fights in a row, it sucks in the UFC, but we say this all the time, like, that's not the worst thing to happen to you if you get cut right now. Because, okay, if he fights the right type of fights. Now, a fight like this against a guy who's 8-10 really isn't a fight you want to take, but I don't mind it to the point where Budka's lost 3 in a row. You don't want to jump in there against an unknown prospect that might be really good and is going to be, out to get you, obviously, because you're a former UFC name. This is a guy you should easily mop the floor with. Your next fight, after you have, some confidence, then go in and fight another, half-decent prospect, right? But right now, just get a win on your record, and so you're not looking at 3 straight losses on your Tapology page, right? So I don't mind this matchmaking at all for Budka, right? And again, he's only 25 years of age, so I think I was harsh when I said earlier, I don't know where he goes. What he needs to do is to win in the regionals for the next, I kid you not, 5 years. It's a long road back, but it's the best road back. Because he comes back, okay, and I'm not telling you Dylan Budka is going to do this, but say he wins here, maybe he becomes the LFA champion. Never got to do that in LFA because he lost to Bekoyev before he could get to the belt, and obviously then he got signed to the UFC. But say he goes to LFA, defends the championship a couple times. Hell, Bukowskis came back really quickly after getting cut. Again, he went to Cage Warriors, but say 3 years of Budka victories. Say he wins 7 fights in 3 years, which is very doable. Actually, it should be very manageable for him. He's 12-5. Okay, Or say he has 9 fights in the next... Let's say he goes 4 years outside the UFC. He goes 10-1 in those fights. Okay, then you're looking at a 17-6 record. Again, just pile up some victories. Out-wrestle guys, because Budka should be able to out-wrestle a lot of guys in the regionals. And then get your next shot in the UFC. So again, not the worst thing. He's only 25 years of age. There's a lot of time for him left. And I think he's going to win this fight. And I think he's going to, hopefully, again, make that next step into getting back in the UFC. But I don't know. We'll see. He should out-wrestle this guy and submit him pretty quickly, though. It's a mismatch. This is the better fight on American Fight Promotions, though, and the one that should be talked about. Alonzo Turner versus Tyler Veal. I'd be surprised if we don't see the winner on the Contender Series shortly. Now, I think, honestly, if it's Tyler Veal, I think Veal's probably more likely to get the shot. I'm going to be honest with you. I look at what Alonzo Turner has done, and I compare that to what Tyler Veal has done, and I say, you know what? I think Veal's actually a little bit more impressive because of the undefeated record. And, okay, I'm also including, if Veal wins this fight, because then he beats Alonzo Turner, who's 7-1. I believe Turner is a favorite in this fight, at least on Tapology. More people have picked Turner. But I think if Veal can win this one, I do think he's right there for the UFC. This is a guy who's 5-0. He's fought 3 times on Anthony Pettis FC, and he's won all 3 of those fights. Yeah, the wins recently, 5-1 and 3-1 guys, but if he can beat a 7-1 Alonzo Turner, I think this is big time for him. The problem with Tyler Veal is he's not really going to finish you. He doesn't have the best hands, power-wise, and he's likely just going to outpoint you. Alonzo Turner, he's a submission guy. He's for the most part a wrestler who's going to look to finish fights on the ground via either ground and pound or submission. But this is a guy who's 7-1. His only loss coming in Ring of Combat back in 2024. My problem with Alonzo Turner is he fought in CFFC back in 2023, has not returned since going 2-0 in that promotion. Fought twice in LFA, won back-to-back fights over there. And since those fights, though, he's been fighting in Tough Enough, which I don't think is that good of a regional. Ring of Combat, it is what it is. That's not a bad promotion, but he lost. And then Mecca and Cage Thunder. What are those promotions? Against guys who are 6-4 and 9-8. Now, a victory over Tyler Veal will go a long way, but I think Alonzo Turner probably needs 2 more wins, including Veal, to get the shot in the Contender. Because who has he beat, right? Tyler Veal, he does need some more finishes, but if he can get, again, this would be a stretch, if he can finish Alonzo Turner in this fight, I don't know how he's going to do that, then I could easily see him getting a shot in the Contender coming off a victory. If not, he's going to need a couple more victories just because, the UFC doesn't like guys who are just decision machines. And honestly, that makes sense, right? But this is a good fight, right? Veal 5-0, Turner 7-1. Easily could see the winner of this fight, again, getting a shot next year in the Contender and putting themselves on a short list of guys who are up next. I don't know who wins the fight, honestly. I think Veal might take it. I look at Alonzo Turner's loss to Jimmy Drago in Ring of Combat just last year. I think there's an opportunity for Veal to win this fight. Again, we'll see. But I think Tyler Veal's probably the guy to watch here. But again, if Alonzo Turner wins, again, he's on the short list as well. Let's move on to the fight you have all been waiting for in Ohio Combat League. Josiah Harrell is taking on Melvin Galard. Melvin Galard is fighting in the year of our Lord 2025. Why? Guys, Melvin Galard has not fought in the UFC since UFC Fight Night 37 against Michael Johnson in 2014 in London, England at the O2, Alexander Gustafsson versus Jimmy Manoa. That was a co-main event. Melvin Galard at the time had 31 wins, 12 losses, and 2 draws. He did fight Justin Gaethje real shortly after that in World Series of Fighting. But anyways, remember that record? 31, 12, and 2. Melvin Galard is now 32, 22, and 2. And his only victory came in his first fight outside the UFC back in World Series in July of 2014. He has not won a fight in 11 years. He's fighting in bare knuckle. He has lost 7 consecutive fights in bare knuckle FC. He's, I think, 2-10 in that promotion. He lost a fight in BKFC because of a head injury. He just fought in United Combat League. Actually, that was 5 years ago, but his last MMA fight was in 2019 against Terry House Jr. in United Combat League. Terry House Jr. was 7-13, and he beat Melvin Galard. What are we doing? I mean, situations like this, it's sad. I think it is. Because I grew up watching Melvin Galard. Melvin Galard, was never, a guy who was going to fight for a belt, but always like a top 15-ish guy who was just around. Had a big win over Evan Dunham where he knocked him out, beat Jeremy Stevens by decision. Actually got to fight Nate Diaz in 2009, fought Dennis Seaver at one point, fought Cowboy I know of. Had a fight against Gagey in World Series. It sucks to see where a guy like him is at right now. I'm just going to be honest. Because you're obviously doing it for money, but you barely win fights anymore. You haven't fought bare knuckle since 2021. You're supposed to fight in 2022, but you got pulled by the Colorado State Athletic Commission because you weren't fit to fight back in 2022. And now you're fighting Josiah Harrell in Ohio Combat League, who's 8-0, was supposed to fight in the UFC against Jack Della Maddalena back in 2023. But before the fight against Jack Della, I believe they found a tumor, I think it was, for Josiah Harrell. He's fine now. The UFC, though, just didn't sign him or didn't bring him back after that. Since, though, Josiah Harrell has had his return fight, that was just a couple months ago, in Ohio Combat League, and he beat Quinton Parks Jr. by TKO in the second round. This is really all just part of Josiah Harrell's, I think, attempt to get back in the UFC, which ultimately, I think he'll be in the Contender Series this year. I firmly believe that. Again, he was supposed to be just a last-second replacement for Jack Della back on International Fight Week in 2023. Again, he got pulled, and then Jack Della had the Basil Hafez fight. Crazy now, though. Jack Della is the world champion. But I think with the victory here, which Josiah Harrell will knock out Melvin Galard in the first round, Josiah Harrell will probably be on the Contender Series this season. If the UFC is willing to clear him. If not, he'll go to the PFL. He'll be like a Brendan Loughnane. I'm not saying he's going to have the success Loughnane had in the PFL, but that's kind of what I can comp him to. Okay, UFC doesn't want to take a shot, so PFL takes him. Or this is messed up. Like Nick Newell. Nah, it's not the same. Newell didn't have an arm. But, the World Series gave him a shot. I believe he fought in Bellator, if I'm not mistaken, right? That's not a great comp because Josiah Harrell just had a brain tumor. I think it was a brain tumor. Anyways, though, Harrell's good. He is, right? I mean, this is a guy who originally was supposed to be in the UFC, has won since. He will dominate this fight. I don't think he's going to knock out Melvin Galard. I think he'll probably TKO him in the first round. Harrell's a good wrestler. Melvin Gallard's been sub 9 times. I mean, there's going to be so many pathways on the ground for Josiah Harrell. He's 26 years old, in his prime. Melvin Galard hasn't won a fight in 11 years. Think about where you were at think about where you were 11 years ago, and think about that's the last time Melvin Galard won a professional mixed martial arts fight. It's unfortunate. But Josiah Harrell will get a first-round TKO or a submission in the first. Whatever way he wants on the ground, he will win. I don't know why Melvin Galard is still fighting, and I hope this is it. Because this is like a Bigfoot situation, man. Like, what are we doing at this point? Let's end this, please. Final fight of the night, or final fight of the week. Let's go to Alaska Fighting Championship. Terence Mitchell takes on Alex Ashenbrenner. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why are we talking about Terence Mitchell? He was a kind of a no-name in the UFC, went 0-2, lost to Cameron Simon, and then lost to Raul Rosas on Mexican Independence Day on Noche back in 2023. The reason I'm talking about this fight is because, yes, Terence Mitchell is a former UFC guy. I think it'll take a lot for him to get back in the UFC. I'm just going to be honest. He's got to fight in better regionals than Alaska FC. It's the guy who fought in the Ultimate Fighter back in 2016, got knocked down 30 seconds against Kai France. That's when the UFC had all their flyweights and the whole basis around that series of the Ultimate Fighter was, okay, the winner's going to fight Mighty Mouse, but we found 16 regional guys who were flyweight champs. We're going to find one guy to fight Mighty Mouse, and it became Tim Elliott who won. But it's okay. It's okay. They got a lot of talent from that show. But Terence Mitchell, I think if he wants to get back in the UFC, yes, he has to fight outside of Alaska FC. He just does. This is not going to get you back in the main show. You're going to have to go fight in LFA. You're going to have to go fight in CFFC, in Fury, who's got a pretty good 125-pound division. There's a lot of good talent over there. Those are the type of fights. I think Fury is actually probably the best spot for Terence Mitchell. I get it. He's an Alaska guy. It makes sense. But you're 35, pal. Again, you're likely not getting another call. But if you do, like, again, the only shot he's going to get at this point is going to be last second replacement, like Propelek last week for Benoit. You're going to have to go fight in Fury and try to become the champion over there. Again, long-term outlook, there's probably not a UFC future for Terence Mitchell. The reason I'm talking about this, though, is that he's been booked against Alex Ashenbrenner like 4 times. They've been booked to fight before Terence Mitchell's, debut in the UFC. They've been booked after his UFC, stint, and they're booked again. So it's a grudge match, man. The 4th time Terence Mitchell's been booked against Alex Ashenbrenner, and now it's finally happening. Terence Mitchell probably wins. Ashenbrenner is not a good jiu-jitsu guy, and Terence Mitchell, I know, again, he got dominated on the ground by Simon and Raul Rosas, but guys, there's just levels to this game. Terence Mitchell will go out here and sub Ashenbrenner or TKO him on the ground in the first round. I just thought I have to mention this fight because, again, it's the 4th time it's been booked. And how many more times are we going to get to talk about Alaska FC? There's not much talent out here. I know, like, Cannonier, I believe. I think Jared Cannonier was an Alaska FC guy. I could be completely wrong about this. But I believe Jared Cannonier has fought in Alaska FC before. Yeah, he was a complete Alaska FC guy prior to the UFC. But there's rarely do we get talent out here, right? Terence Mitchell's another one of these guys. But the Alaskan MMA regional scene isn't usually the best. But I thought we'd talk about it just because, again, Mitchell is, fighting Ashenbrenner. At least they're booked for the 4th time in the last 5 years. So, I don't know. It's a grudge match, right? We're pumped for it. Anyways, folks, that does it for this week in regional mixed martial arts. If you did like the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more. Make sure to leave a like. We'll do this every single week here on the channel. Again, just highlighting the best talent outside the UFC and former UFC and PFL guys trying to get their shot back in a major promotion. So make sure to go check out our UFC Fight Night Burns versus Morales predictions as well, folks. Thank y'all for watching, and Mamba